You're listening to Ants Talk.
My next guest is a classical singer who trained at the Conservatorium of Music at the University of Melbourne before performing in Australia and Europe. Along her performing journey, however, she experienced some challenges with her mental health and struggled to find a practitioner who understood the specific issues prevalent in the industry. Please welcome to the show, Cailin Howarth. How are you, Cailin?
Hello. I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm actually really fascinated by your story because I myself was a performer when I was younger.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. So I've done singing and a bit of acting and a bit of modeling back in the day when I was young and pretty. And
You're
I
still
really,
beautiful.
oh, thank you. And I really do see the prevalence in what you're talking about. Even just recently, there's so many of my friends that still work in the industry who have recently just buried friends that were also in the industry from suicide.
Wow.
So it's still very prevalent. What I wanted to start
Absolutely.
with, though, is how did you find opera?
Yeah, so it's a fairly I guess, obscure art form these days. It's becoming less common, unfortunately, because it's a really beautiful art form. But
It is.
I found it actually, I started playing the violin when I was quite young, probably around 8 or 9 years old, and just immediately fell in love with classical music. I just sort of had an affiliation with the style and just immediately took it on board. And when I got to high school, I started getting singing lessons because I had to join the school choir because I played an instrument.
Right.
And the leader of the choir said, "Oh, you've got quite a strong voice. Have you ever thought about getting singing lessons?" And not really. I sort of always enjoyed singing in the car, but hadn't really ever thought too much about it, to be honest. And then it just kind of went from there, really, from singing in the school choir to getting singing lessons, and then just really loving being on stage, loving the music. And basically from then on, there was just no other path for me that I wanted to follow. And so opera kind of naturally came from getting the classical singing lessons.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that.
Mm,
I personally love classical music also. I mean, I grew up with it when I was younger purely because I also did, music and singing lessons when I was younger, and it was introduced to me in that way, and I fell in love with it immediately. And then I saw sort of operas when I was younger and was
mm,
just like, this is just amazing. And then I even saw Jose Carreros live. And it was
mm.
absolutely amazing how strong a voice could be because I was in one of the back seats, nosebleed seats, but I could literally feel his voice hitting me as he sang.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
And there's no microphones with opera. It's all
No,
just the voice. And the strength of the voice is just incredible.
it absolutely is amazing. So, how did you find performing when you were performing?
So it was, I mean, I loved performing and I still do perform, but it's a very, it's a difficult industry. As you alluded to in your introduction, there are a lot of difficulties that come with being in the creative fields and in the performing arts. So whilst I was on stage, I absolutely loved it. It was almost as though there was this freedom that you almost don't get anywhere else, despite being watched by hundreds or thousands of people.
Yeah.
But there is also a lot of difficulties that come with it: the stress, the instability, not knowing sort of when your next paycheck's going to come in, the constant people constantly judging you. I guess you have to have a very thick skin to be in the performing arts or the creative industries. And so whilst I loved it, there were also a lot of difficulties that came with being in the industry as well.
Yeah. That's the thing I think that most people don't realize. I mean, I work as a makeup artist and have worked with celebrities for many years, and the biggest celebrities in Australia that people think are making these millions of dollars are still looking for the next paycheck.
Absolutely.
Like, it's not a constant thing. Sure, there are you people that are sort of the flavor of the month that we start to see on 6 or 10 reality shows, and sure, they're making the money, but that soon sort of dries up very quickly. And it's a weird industry because someone that is so well known, when work isn't sort of coming around, they can't really go and work in Coles, and they can't really go and work stand in a dole queue because you're literally coming from this arena where been praised and idolized and all over TV and media, etc., etc. So you then going and staying in a dole queue doesn't really gel with the reality of life. I mean, sure, it's something you've got to do sometimes and swallow your pride, but it is such a difficult thing to deal with. And I think a lot of people don't
Absolutely.
understand that point.
And you all know, people don't understand it, but also it's not something that's really taught or discussed when you're training to take on this type of career. So when I was at university, you spend so many hours perfecting your craft, whatever that might be, singing, acting, dancing, which is absolutely necessary if you want to make it at the most elite level in the arts.
Yeah.
But there was just almost no discussion of the psychological side of performing and how to deal with those things that we've just been discussing: the instability, the uncertainty, feeling as though you're not good enough, the imposter syndrome, all of these things which are very prevalent in the arts. But it's
and the
just not
competition
something.
alone, I mean,
Absolutely,
back
there's
in the
so much
day,
competition.
yeah, back in the day with even doing makeup. I mean, I was a rarity back in the day as a male doing makeup, where these days it's every second guy's doing makeup and there's a bazillion girls doing it. It's incredible how much my industry alone has changed. And the competition is fierce. And you've
It
always got
is.
someone that will do it for a little bit cheaper because they want the experience, and it's a cutthroat.
Yeah. And on that, people who perhaps aren't involved in the arts are often offering or often asking people in the arts to perform for exposure or for not being paid
That
in a
good old word.
monetary amount, which, you'll have a great exposure if you do this event. But
Yeah.
little do they know how many thousands of dollars and how many hours have been spent in the past perfecting that craft. It's like being a doctor, or it's like being, a makeup artist. In your instance, you train, and there is sometimes the expectation that you should give those skills for little to no money, and it's difficult to deal with.
I mean, it's funny because even with just makeup alone, for me just to do a basic face without even charging, it costs me $65 because I'm buying all the makeup. And with majority of faces, you're putting on 22 products on a face, and that
Wow.
really does add up. So people need to really look at the arts a little bit differently because I think that too many people do exactly what you're saying. They're expecting too much out of us for free, and they don't give the respect that is actually well deserved, because we really do work hard to get to where we go with our careers.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, that's one of the main reasons why I decided to start this business that I've started, because my experience, has been very difficult. Yeah.
Yeah. So what were the mental health struggles that you were coping with at the time?
Yeah, so I experienced a number of different mental health challenges over the course of my career. So I was diagnosed with anxiety. I was also diagnosed with depression as well over the course of this time. And even sort of 5 to 10 years ago, when I was pursuing this career, it was nowhere near as acceptable to talk about these things openly as it is now. And it's very it's a difficult thing to deal with if you don't feel as though you have a network or a community where you can talk about these issues that you're having.
Yeah, definitely. And the hard thing too is within that industry, we have to really turn it on when we're in front of people. And that becomes harder and harder when you are dealing with things such as anxiety, because it doesn't make it easier to walk into a room full of people and paint a smile on your face. It really makes it 10 times harder.
Well, you're in the spotlight constantly. People come and see you because they want to escape their lives, and they expect to be transported to a different place that might take them away from their own challenges that they might be having. but it's not really thought about the kind of difficulties the performer might be having.
That's right.
And people in the performing and creative industries tend to have a greater degree of mental health challenges than the general population anyway. But that's not something that's really considered.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think too, I mean, in a way, it's become sort of more focused in the last couple of years because we have had so many high-profile people within the entertainment industry that have taken their own lives due to mental health issues. So I think that the public are becoming a little bit more aware of it. They're probably not aware of the prevalence of it. It's quite high within the industry, and I think that that's one thing that people don't really see.
Well, you wouldn't expect it either, because you go and see a film, or you go and see a performer, and they come across as so together, so confident. How people, I think, who haven't ever performed, see people up on stage and think to themselves, "God, I could never do that." They must be so confident.
Yeah,
They must
exactly.
be so present to their skills and to their value that they bring. But there's so much going on underneath the surface that the general population, but also those in the industry, I think, probably have no idea about either.
Yeah, little do they realize the terrifying moments just before having to step out on stage and open your mouth.
Absolutely.
Boy, do
I
I
can speak from personal
remember.
experience that it can be terrifying.
Oh, it really is. I mean, I auditioned for a few things when I was younger, and every time it never went away. It never got any better. It was absolutely terrifying every time.
Mm.
It never
Yeah,
changed for me. It never ever changed.
you can learn to deal with the
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 nerves,
stresses of it, of the
yeah.
nerves, and have sort of skills or techniques that work for you, that help to lessen the impact of the nerves or whatever it is that you're dealing with. But
Mm.
I don't think it's something that ever completely disappears. I think you just learn to cope with the symptoms better.
Yeah, exactly. So back then, how many practitioners did you see during that period?
So I probably went and spoke to maybe 5 or 6 over the course of a number of
Wow.
years. And they ranged from sort of counselors to psychologists. I went and saw a psychiatrist at one point. And whilst it was helpful to some extent, I just felt that the people that I spoke to didn't really understand the specific issues that I was experiencing.
Yeah.
So whilst the symptoms were alleviated at different points across time, I think perhaps the core reason for the anxiety and the depression, perhaps in the first place, wasn't combated directly.
Yeah, I've sought help myself when I've gone through issues different times of my life. And it's funny, I really do believe in that saying that you've got to find the right person. I still didn't find that
Mm.
right person, but I found that with so many people, whether it be a counselor, whether it be a psychologist, a therapist, it they just didn't get it. And it seemed to me that my life was a completely different scenario to anything that they've ever experienced in their lives. I mean, these are people that have gone to school, had pretty normal lives, gone and got educated at university, haven't had much life experience, haven't had any street experience. And with me, I've had all of that, and it was like I just was getting nothing out of it, and it was so generic. And majority of the time, it was sort of them just getting you to talk, and then giving you almost homework to read stuff about things that they wanted you to read about. And I was like, well, how is this helping me? It's not really helping me
Mm.
at all. So a lot of the
Yeah.
time, I would just end it myself, and I would never go back. So I never really got the help I needed from anyone else. I just had to deal with it myself and heal myself, really.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry to hear that you had that experience, and I think probably a lot of people have had a similar experience. And I agree with what you said at the start of that, which was you need to find somebody who you feel you have a connection to. If you're going to speak to someone about your deepest, darkest fears and secrets, you want to feel as though that person, that you can relate to that person, and they
Exactly.
understand what you have been through in your life, and that they can provide some guidance.
This is Ants Talk.
So you actually ended up identifying a gap in the psychological services available to performers and creatives, and subsequently returned to study psychology. And then you've started the Performer's Edge to actually remedy this gap. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So as a result of being in the industry and what we've spoken about, having some mental health challenges myself, and not feeling as though the industry, there was anybody really in the industry who could help me with the specific issues that I was having, I decided to take this into my own hands. So I went back and studied psychology. I learned a lot about mental skills training and performance psychology, and started the Performer's Edge, which is a performance coaching business specifically for creatives and performing artists. So I work one-on-one with people to help them reach their full potential.
That's so cool. So I'm going to just fill the listeners in a little bit on what you actually
Sure.
do. So you actually support creatives and performers reach their full potential by overcoming their specific challenges through bespoke coaching and utilizing best practice performance psychology. Whilst this type of service is commonplace in elite sports and in the corporate world, you have been working in London since in the past couple of years, and this is one of the first of its kind within the arts sector, and your goal is to make the service customary in the industry. Is that correct? Does that sound
Absolutely.
right?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So, as you said, this type of coaching and this type of performance psychology is very common in sports. So, all of the major sports
Mm,
teams, they'll all have a psychologist working with the individuals and with the teams in order to help them overcome whatever challenges are hindering them from reaching their full potential, whether that be performance anxiety, as we spoke about earlier, whether
yeah.
that be lack of confidence or feeling like an imposter at the top level, motivation, concentration. There are all these different psychological challenges that people may experience in elite performance jobs, which,
Mm,
as I said earlier, we're not taught anything about at university or really within the industry. So it is my goal to make this type of learning customary in the
yeah.
industry. And with the people that I've been working with so far, they've really just found that it's an invaluable experience for them.
It's funny, going back to a couple of points you've just made there. So with sportsmen alone, I know a personal friend of mine, and she's actually been interviewed on the show, who teaches meditation. And she was taken on by one of the football teams here to go and teach the guys about meditation.
Mm.
And I also know when you watch shows almost like I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and you get the sportsmen that go onto that show, and they really talk about that imposter syndrome a lot. And it just goes to show how much money and time and effort is put into the background and the psychological welfare of sports people in Australia, where in Australia we've just had the arts funding cut this
Yeah,
year. And that sort of stuff really infuriates me, purely because we know how much the arts give back to society. It's, from performing to artists to musicians. I mean, there's so many avenues. And to cut the funding is ridiculous, because these are the sort of areas
absolutely.
that could help.
Yeah, and it's not even just from a financial perspective, and we know how much of a financial impact the arts have
Mm,
on the economy. You have all of these amazing artists performing across Australia, and I used to work at the Arts Centre in Melbourne, which is a huge artistic area, and the amount of financial impact that has on the economy is just great. But then, not even from a financial perspective, but from a community perspective, from
yeah,
a just from an emotional perspective on Australians, it's such an important part of our identity. And you speak to anyone and they'll have a particular experience that they've had at a concert or at a play that's just had an impact on them, which they'll never forget.
yeah.
And it's those kind of things that you can't measure financially, but that have such a positive impact on our community as a whole.
I mean, it's gotten to a sad situation where in Australia, our elite creatives have to end up leaving the country to make a success of themselves. And then once they do that, majority of them are ripped down and pulled apart by every single Australian with tall poppy syndrome. So it's
Mm,
it's such a chaotic industry. It really is. And I think that people really need to sort of sit back and take a second look at the reality behind it, because to a lot of people, I think in Australia, especially when you go onto blogs and onto Facebook and you see conversations and people talking about celebrities, and they really do think that majority of people within the entertainment industry have got the luxury life. I mean, that's majority thinking, where the reality is far from it in most cases, far from it.
absolutely. And I
So,
can speak from, I
sorry,
can speak
Kel,
from the
continue.
perspective of, from opera singers, and exactly as you said, there are very few organisations in Australia where you can make a living as an opera singer without taking on other types of jobs, teaching or
Yeah,
working in some other totally different area in order to fill the gaps in your finances. And so most people, unfortunately, because we have some incredible talent in Australia,
we
most
really
people
do.
end up having to go to the UK or to Europe or to the States where the arts are better funded
Mm.
in order to make a living. And sometimes people will come back to Australia in their later years if they want to return home. But unfortunately, what's happening a lot of the time is that people are having to leave the country in order to make a living.
Another thing too is it's funny. I mean, even in the modeling industry, people look at models and think, "Oh my God, they must be making so much money." I know for a fact that even here in Adelaide, there's been fashion parades that have gone on where the models are getting paid $25 an hour to do the parade, but they are expected to go and do, training. So they're actually practice for the actual parade itself. And let's say there's 3 of those, which they're not getting paid for.
Wow.
There's one, some that are getting paid, $100 for a photo shoot. I mean, hello, we all know how far $100 goes. Not very far at all.
Not
So
very
I
far.
don't see them running out to buy a yacht just yet.
Absolutely not. And I think probably the people that we do see on TV, the Leonardo DiCaprios of the world, and
Mm,
the Angelina Jolies, they're the absolute, top 0.001% of
exactly.
people who are earning a huge amount of money. But
And the
the
industry in
rest
the
of us,
US is so different to the industry here. I mean, there's very
mm,
little money here for the industry itself. Very little money.
mm,
So, what
mm.
does a typical day for you look like now?
Well, a typical day has changed quite a lot in the last year. So a typical day a year ago was I was working in a management consulting job in London, working full time, working for somebody else. And then now that I've started my own business, it's very varied. So today, for example, I'm speaking with you this morning, and then I'm speaking with a client in the early afternoon, an actor that I'm working with. And then a lot of my time is spent basically getting the word out there about this new service that I'm offering, because as I said, this is a type of service that's not particularly common.
Yeah.
And so a lot of my time is spent just talking to people, going and having conversations with people in the industry, and explaining how important this type of work is if we want to have a an arts industry that is able to last, and that the people who are working in it are able to have long and sustainable careers.
Yeah. I mean, I can see this definitely being utilized by almost universities and places like NIDA and stuff like that. They really
Mm.
should be sort of taking this on board and offering you as almost like a preferred client, almost, that they could send people to that may face issues throughout their career.
Yeah, so I am. Fortunately, I am seeing change, and I from when I was studying, that this type of thing is becoming more spoken about. It's not
Mm.
necessarily being invested in yet, but I am speaking to a lot of organizations, artistic organizations, about what I'm doing, and people are interested. It's just a matter of changing that frame of thinking of, oh, we haven't spent money on this type of thing in the past.
Yeah.
Why should we start doing it now? But when you are able to show the benefits of it from the people that you've been working with, then it's kind of hard to deny that this is something that has to be invested more in.
Yeah. And I think too, just in general, mental illness is something that's being spoken about a lot more these days. It's so important, and I'm never embarrassed about it. I'm quite happily say to people that I'm fragile and broken sometimes. I'm quite proud of the fact that it shows me that I'm normal. And I think that that's the thing, is that majority of, I mean, I would say all of us face something throughout our lives. I think that people saying that it never has happened to them or will never happen to them, I think you're kidding yourself. I think that through
Absolutely.
life, it may not be as to the extent of what you've seen other people deal with. It might be something very minor, but I think we all face something. And that's why this sort of stuff is so important.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think that when they hear the word mental health, they think of mental ill health, so mental
Yeah.
health in a negative perspective, whereas everybody has mental health. It's very much on a spectrum, and
Exactly.
for most of your life, you might be on the upper end of the spectrum where you feel confident and fulfilled and present to your value. But then there might be things that happen in your life which change that, a divorce or being made redundant from a job, which then means that your place on that spectrum changes, and having someone to speak to about that is so important.
Yeah. It's not always about running around screaming at your shadow and stuff like that.
No, and I think
Everyone's different.
and I think having these kind of conversations in a public space where we are speaking about our own challenges, I think then enables other people to speak about the challenges that they might be having. And the more we speak about it, the more common it will become, and the less stigma there will be associated to saying, "Hey, I'm actually really struggling at the moment.
Yeah.
Can you give me some help?"
No, exactly. What advice would you offer anyone facing mental issues at the moment?
I think the most important thing for me is just talking to somebody. It doesn't have to be a professional. Talking to a friend, talking to a family member, and just saying, "Look, I'm really struggling at the moment, and I'd really appreciate some support, whatever that might look like." And just talking to someone, because as soon as you talk to someone, the weight of shame or whatever it is you've been telling yourself about those feelings that you've been having lifts. And you'll probably find that, as we've discussed, that person that you speak to has had their own challenges that they're able to speak to you about. And it's in that dialogue that some of that weight is lifted,
Mm.
and you can figure out what direction you want to take, whether it's just talking to your friends and family, or if it is something that you think you might want some professional support with.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too. I mean, I think that majority of us would be quite happy to hear our friends talk about their feelings and try and offer them some advice.
Mm.
So, where can people find you?
So they can find me online. So they can find me on my website, which is www.theperformersedge.world. They can also find me on Instagram. I'm at the.performers.edge, or on Facebook, which is at the Performers Edge.
Fantastic. And just before we sign off, I just wanted to also let people know that if you ever need to chat or anything like that, in Australia, we have Lifeline, whose number is 131114. And you can also go online and Google your own local service that will be able to help you. There's even services out there that you don't even have to talk to anybody. You can actually just text. So make sure you Google if you feel like you need to have a chat to somebody and ease your load. It's the best thing you can do for yourself. Also, just to let listeners know, please tune in each week. We've always got something new coming up, some amazing people, just like Cailin herself. And also subscribe, because then you will be updated with each new episode. Thank you so much for your time, Cailin. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that a lot of performers out there will be really interested in listening to this episode. I think it's an important thing you're doing, and you should be very proud.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and best of luck with your upcoming episodes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.